People think leaving an HOA is just a simple form and a quiet goodbye. But the morning I pulled my property out of the HOA, it felt like I had set off a neighborhood alarm. I parked my truck in my own driveway, something completely legal now, and before I could even finish my coffee, Karen was already storming toward me like I had committed a federal crime. She wasn't calm, she wasn't confused, she was furious. Furious that she no longer had control over me, furious that I had slipped out from under her rules, and furious that I dared to breathe without her permission. She demanded inspections. She shouted about regulations, and when I told her, calmly, that I was no longer under HOA authority, she completely snapped. She called the police, lied about me being dangerous, claimed I was armed, and even said I had threatened her. And in her mind, she truly believed the cops would drag me out of my own home just because she said so. But what she didn't know was that the officer who would arrive wasn't the savior she imagined. It was my son, a real sheriff, and when he realized Karen had filed a false report, trespassed, and laid her hands on him, that's when everything changed. That's when Karen's war on me became a war against the law, and she was seconds away from losing everything. The sun was still low when I stepped out onto my porch, the kind of soft, orange glow that makes the entire neighborhood feel calm and untouched. I had a fresh cup of coffee in my hand, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe in my own home without the constant pressure of judgment, surveillance, and ridiculous HOA standards pressing against my chest. The email from the HOA still sat unopened on my phone, but it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't under their authority. Not today. Not ever again. The contract had been voided. My property had been miszoned years ago. The county admitted the oversight, corrected it, and released me from the HOA entirely. Most people would have celebrated quietly. Maybe told a close friend. Maybe posted something small online. But me, I just wanted peace. Peace was enough. Peace was everything, but Karen, she wasn't built for peace. She was built for control. The first sign that something was wrong came when I noticed her standing on the sidewalk across the street, arms folded so tightly, she looked like she was trying to squeeze the rage out of her own bones. She wasn't doing anything, not yet, but she watched me with the kind of cold intensity that made me wonder if she had been planted there overnight, waiting for me to walk outside so she could confront me the second she saw something non-compliant. I ignored her. I took another sip of coffee. I walked down my driveway, opened my truck door, and climbed inside so I could move it forward a few feet. The simple, harmless act that would later start an entire war. The second the truck wheels settled on the driveway, Karen's composure snapped like a dry twig. She didn't walk. She didn't jog. She marched. Sharp, fast, aggressive steps that echoed across the concrete like she was coming to arrest me herself. I stepped out of the truck just as she reached the halfway point. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I blinked slowly. "Parking my truck! That is a violation!" she snapped. "Driveway parking is prohibited by Section 4, Article 13. "I'm not in the HOA anymore," I said calmly. She froze. Literally froze. Her eyes widened, and the shock on her face looked like someone had just told her the sun wasn't rising today. "What did you say?" "I said," I repeated, "I withdrew from the HOA. It's done. It's approved." The county signed off. Her jaw dropped slightly, but her pride wouldn't let her show confusion for long. She straightened her shoulders, narrowed her eyes, and tightened her grip on the blue HOA binder she carried everywhere like it was her Bible. "That's impossible," she said. "You can't leave the HOA. It's permanent." "Actually," I replied, "it's not. Look it up." She opened her mouth to argue, but closed it again when she realized she didn't have a counterattack prepared. Then her eyes twitched with panic, brief but visible. Karen didn't like surprises. She didn't like losing control. And she definitely didn't like the idea of someone stepping out from under her authority. "I'm calling the board," she hissed. "You can," I said. "They don't control me anymore." She spun on her heel, stomped away, and disappeared down the street with the determination of someone planning something bigger than an argument. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. An hour later, I heard pounding on my front door, 5 rapid bangs, followed by another 3. I checked my security camera before opening the door, and there she was again, breathing hard, hair messy, binder now stuffed with loose papers sticking out in every direction. "Open the door!" she screamed. "This is official HOA business." I opened it halfway because, honestly, she looked unstable. "What now, Karen?" "You cannot leave the HOA," she shouted, her voice cracking. "I've spoken to the board, and we all agree that your withdrawal is invalid." "The county approved it," I repeated. "Legally." "No!" she yelled, slamming her hand on the side of my doorframe. "You don't get to decide that." "The board does." "That's not how the law works." Her breathing quickened. Her eyes darted wildly across my porch, like she was searching for something else to criticize. "I'm conducting a property inspection," she said suddenly. "No, you're not. I have the right to inspect every home in the community." "You don't have the right to inspect homes that aren't in the community anymore," I corrected. She glared at me with pure hatred, the kind that only comes from people who feel their power slipping away from their hands. Then she pointed her finger at me like she was issuing an order. "If you refuse an inspection, I will call law enforcement." "Do it," I said. Her mouth fell open. She wasn't expecting that. She was expecting fear, compliance, panic. She was used to people folding under her pressure, but I had nothing left to lose. Her hands shook as she whipped out her phone, dialing with frantic urgency. She stepped off my porch and began pacing back and forth, speaking loudly enough that the entire street could hear her. "Yes." "Hello," she said dramatically into the phone. "I'm reporting a hostile homeowner who is refusing legal HOA orders." I rolled my eyes. He is aggressive, threatening and refusing lawful compliance. I raised my eyebrows. He has a dangerous dog. I didn't even own a dog. He is armed. I was literally holding a cup of coffee. He threatened my safety. I hadn't moved an inch. Everything she said was a lie, and she didn't care. She finished the call with a dramatic gasp. "Yes, send an officer immediately." "This man is dangerous," I sighed. "Karen, the whole thing is on camera." "Good," she snapped. "The police will see what you did." And then, almost like fate itself stepped into the front yard. My son's sheriff SUV turned the corner and pulled into my driveway. Karen went completely still. Her eyes widened as a uniformed law enforcement officer stepped out of the vehicle, tall, calm, confident, in sunglasses reflecting the quiet neighborhood. But this officer wasn't responding to Karen's call. He wasn't even aware of the situation. He was my son, coming home for lunch. Before Karen could process what was happening, she ran toward him. "Officer!" she screamed. "Thank God you're here. Arrest him immediately. He violated HOA laws. He is a danger to the community." My son glanced at her, then at me, confusion on his face. "Mom, what's going on?" "She called the cops," I said, "because I left the HOA." He exhaled slowly, the kind of slow exhale law enforcement officers do when they realize someone is wasting their time. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, "HOA violations are not criminal matters." Her face twisted. "Yes, they are." "No," he said calmly. "They're not. He broke community policies. That's civil, not criminal." She shook with rage. "I order you to arrest him." "You don't have the authority to give me orders," he replied. She stepped closer. "That man is a threat to this neighborhood." "He's my mother," he said. Silence, pure, stunned silence. Karen's face went pale, then red, then white again. "You," she whispered, voice shaking. "You're related?" "Yes," he said. "And you made a false police report, lied about threats, trespassed on private property, and attempted to interfere with a law enforcement officer." "No, no, no," she screamed. "I did nothing wrong. I am HOA." And then she made the biggest mistake of her life. She shoved him right in the chest, and that was assault. He stepped forward, grabbed her wrists, and turned her around. "Ma'am," he said, "you're under arrest." Her scream echoed across the neighborhood. "You can't do this! I'm HOA! I'm HOA! I run this community!" But she didn't run anything, not anymore. Long, cinematic, detailed, as your story continues. Karen's scream was still echoing through the neighborhood as my son guided her toward his patrol SUV. She twisted and fought like a cat dropped into a bathtub, kicking her heels against the pavement, shouting every name she could think of. as if throwing words into the air might undo reality. "This is illegal." She shrieked. "You can't arrest a board member. You can't arrest HOA authority." My son opened the back door of his SUV calmly, the same calm he used during traffic stops, domestic calls, or whenever someone's panic tried to turn into power. "Ma'am," he said, "HOA authority does not override state law. It should," she shouted. "It doesn't. You're abusing your power. This is police corruption. This is favoritism." "You shoved a law enforcement officer," he replied. "That's assault. I didn't even touch you." She screamed, loud enough for 3 houses down to hear. My son stepped aside, looked at the security camera over my door and said, "Everything was recorded." Her mouth snapped shut like a trap. The first real silence since she'd arrived. That silence didn't last long. Neighbors were coming out of their homes now, peeking behind curtains, stepping out onto porches, pretending to walk their dogs, even though the dogs were still half asleep. The entire street seemed to realize they were witnessing something legendary, something they would absolutely talk about in the Facebook neighborhood group for the next 5 years. My son gently lowered Karen into the back seat, but she blocked the doorway with her foot. "This is a mistake," she hissed. "You're going to lose your job over this." "I know people." My son raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, please move your foot. I pay taxes," she yelled, as if that was a magic phrase that cancelled handcuffs. "Yes," he said, "so does everyone else. You won't get away with this." "I'm not trying to get away with anything. I'm doing my job." She tried one final desperate threat. "I will have your badge." "My captain will get the footage," he said calmly. "He'll see exactly what happened." For the first time, real fear crossed her face. Not anger. Not outrage. Fear. The kind of fear that creeps up when someone realizes they aren't the hero of their own story. They're the villain. My son shut the SUV door. She screamed again. The sound bounced between the houses like a broken siren. He turned toward me. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine, honestly." He nodded. "I'll take her in. She'll probably get processed, maybe released on bail, but the charges will stand." "Good," I said. "She needed to learn. And Mom," he added, lowering his voice, "I saw the withdrawal papers. You're legally separate from the HOA. They can't bother you again. If they try, it's harassment, and you call me immediately." I smiled. "I will." As he walked back toward the driver's side, I saw Karen in the back seat, thrashing again, screaming through the closed window. I couldn't hear her words, but I didn't need to. The desperation on her face told the whole story. The queen of the HOA, the woman who ruled the neighborhood with iron rules and imaginary power, was finally facing real consequences. The SUV pulled out of the driveway, turned down the street, and disappeared around the corner. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. I had barely stepped inside my home when my phone buzzed. 3 messages, all from different neighbors. Then more, then more. My notifications were blowing up like fireworks. Most were supportive, some were shocked, a few were terrified, asking if the HOA was going to retaliate. But the message that stood out, the message that made my stomach clench, came from an unknown number. "You made a big mistake." No name. No context. Just a threat, and I knew exactly where it came from. The HOA board. Karen may have been the loudest. But she wasn't the only one, and they weren't done, not even close. This was just the beginning. The moment my son placed Karen in cuffs, the neighborhood didn't know what to do with itself. People stood across lawns, gripping their coffee mugs like they were afraid to blink. Curtains cracked open as if the houses themselves were curious. The HOA board members, who had once treated Karen like their self-appointed queen, were suddenly nowhere to be found. They didn't rush over. They didn't defend her. They didn't even peek outside. They vanished like smoke, guilty smoke. But Karen wasn't done. Not even close. As my son walked her toward the cruiser, she twisted her head toward me, eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. "This isn't over!" she screamed. "You think you can leave the HOA? You think you can get away with this? I'll sue you! I'll sue the county. I'll sue—" My son calmly shut the cruiser door, her words slamming against the glass like trapped wasps. "Mom," he said quietly, "you okay?" I nodded, but my hands were shaking. Not out of fear. That left the moment my son arrived. but out of the weight of everything building up for so long. The fake violations. The neighbors bullied into silence. The threats! The way I had spent months feeling like a prisoner inside a community I once loved. I just want to leave, I whispered. That's all I wanted. My son squeezed my shoulder. Then you're leaving, today. But the county protocol meant Karen wasn't taken away immediately. She needed to be processed, paperwork filed, statements collected. While another deputy took over the scene, my son guided me back to the porch. Tell me everything, he said. So I did. Every letter she forced into my mailbox. Every fake complaint about my yard, my porch light, my mailbox paint. Every threat that if I didn't obey her, she'd handle it. My son listened the way only a trained officer could, calm, steady, focused. But every few minutes, I saw a flicker of anger beneath his professionalism. Not just because she had targeted me, but because she had abused the authority she pretended to have. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. Mom, you know this isn't just HOA stuff, right? Some of what she did. It crosses real lines. Harassment, targeting, maybe even extortion, depending on how she worded those letters. I stared at him. I just wanted to move out peacefully. I know, he said. And now we're going to make sure you can. That's when the deputy supervising Karen approached my son, quietly. Sheriff, we've got a problem, my son stood. What kind of problem? Her husband just showed up. I froze. Karen had a husband? In 5 years, I'd never seen him, not once. The deputy pointed toward the street. And there he was, a tall, stiff-backed man stepping out of a black SUV with the HOA logo plastered on the side. He wore a blazer, polished shoes, and an expression that said he was used to making people obey without question. He walked straight toward us like a man walking into his own boardroom. My wife will be released immediately, he announced. She is the acting compliance supervisor of this community, and you have no authority here. My son didn't move. Didn't blink. Sir, step back. But the man kept walking. She had every right to question this woman, he said, pointing at me like I was a problem he needed to erase. She was enforcing HOA rules. You officers don't understand how this community works. My son stepped forward. Sir, step back. The man took one more bold step, and that was the wrong move. My son's voice dropped into that tone, the one that freezes any sane person. Final warning, the man glared. Do you know who I am? Yes, my son said calmly. You're the next problem I'm about to deal with. The deputy beside him quietly rested a hand on their taser. The neighborhood went silent again. Birds stopped. Air tightened, and for the first time I saw something flicker in the man's eyes. Doubt. But it wasn't over. Not even close. The second the HOA husband hesitated in front of my son, I felt the entire energy of the neighborhood shift. You could almost sense the moment he realized he wasn't dealing with the kind of people he was used to walking over. My son didn't need to puff up his chest or shout. The steady way he stared at the man told everyone he meant exactly every word he spoke. But the HOA husband wasn't someone who backed down easily. You could tell by the way he adjusted the cuff of his blazer before speaking again, like he needed to remind himself of his importance. Sheriff, he said, the word dripping with condescension. I think you're misunderstanding the situation. My wife wasn't doing anything illegal. She was enforcing guidelines that this community agreed to. My son shook his head. No. What she was doing was harassing a homeowner who is no longer under your authority. And what you're doing right now is interfering with an active investigation. I have every right to be here, the husband said sharply. This is my neighborhood. And she, my son replied, motioning toward the cruiser, is my mother. So tread very carefully. For the first time, the husband actually looked at me. Not like I was a neighbor, not like I was a person, but like I was something inconvenient. Something that needed to be removed. Something that had broken his perfect little order. Your move-out paperwork isn't final, he said to me. Until the transition date is passed, you are still under HOA compliance. And if you continue to refuse, I will personally impose fines for non-cooperation. I stared at him. I'm not refusing anything. I'm just leaving, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. People like you always think you can just leave, but rules are rules. My son positioned himself between us. Sir, that's enough. But the husband wasn't done. He crossed his arms. Do you really believe the sheriff's department is going to waste resources on this? On her? He pointed at me again with the confidence of a man who always got his way. She's one of those residents who doesn't understand structure. She ignores guidelines. She pushes boundaries. My son cut him off. Sir, you're about 30 seconds away from being detained for harassment, intimidation, and obstruction. So unless you want to join your wife in the back of that cruiser, I suggest you walk back to your vehicle. You can't talk to me like that, the man snapped. My son didn't even blink. I just did, neighbors murmured. Somewhere across the road, a woman whispered. About time somebody stood up to them. Another man, clutching a lawn chair like a shield, added, They've been running this place like a dictatorship for years. The husband's face twitched. He wasn't used to an audience seeing him lose. And then he made the mistake that sealed everything. He took out his phone. He dialed someone and lifted the phone just loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes, hi. This is Gregory Hale. I need you to dispatch real officers to my home immediately. The sheriff currently on scene is abusing his authority, threatening me, and unlawfully detaining my wife. My son chuckled under his breath. Sir, you just called my department, the man blinked. Who do you think picks up that line? My son asked calmly. The husband lowered the phone slowly. His face drained of color, but the damage was done. My son nodded to the deputy. Put him in cuffs. The deputy stepped forward. Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back. You can't do this, the husband barked. I know the board. This isn't about the board, the deputy said. This is about interfering with law enforcement and making a false emergency call. As the deputy secured the cuffs, the husband shouted to the neighborhood, You're all witnessing abuse of power. This is illegal. The cruiser door shut, silencing him, and then something incredible happened. The neighborhood, silent, fearful, tense for hours, suddenly shifted. Neighbors began stepping out from their driveways, from behind cars, from backyards. People who had been too intimidated to speak for years finally found their courage because someone else had stood up first. A woman with a stroller approached my porch carefully. Ma'am, she said softly, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but... Thank you, I blinked. For what? For not backing down. For showing them that they don't run our lives. Another neighbor added, We've all been scared of them. They fined my wife for having a birdhouse. A birdhouse. Said it wasn't the right shade of brown. A man from 2 houses down stepped closer. They made me pay a $600 fine because my trash cans were visible for 6 minutes past pickup time. 6 minutes. The stories poured out. Fines for wind chimes. Fines for leaving a garage door open while unloading groceries. Fines for children drawing chalk art on the sidewalk. Fines for having a garden hose coiled in the wrong pattern. Every ridiculous, petty abuse of power spilled out like the HOA's sins were finally seeing the sun after years of darkness. My son listened quietly, taking everything in. When everyone finished, he looked at me and said, Mom, I'm calling in a county investigator. This is bigger than Karen, bigger than her husband. They've been abusing authority for years. He walked away to make the call. The moment he stepped aside, I finally let myself exhale. For the first time in what felt like months, my chest didn't feel tight. My house didn't feel like a prison. My yard didn't feel like it belonged to someone else. I sat on the porch step. The same step Karen once said was non-compliant. Funny, now she was the one in the back of a cruiser while I was breathing free air. 30 minutes later, the investigator arrived. A tall, serious woman with a badge that seemed to command the attention of every neighbor instantly. She interviewed me, my son, the neighbors, and when I showed her the folders of letters Karen had shoved into my mailbox over the past year, her jaw tightened. This isn't HOA enforcement, she said. This is targeted harassment and potentially misuse of authority. The investigator ordered the HOA building sealed for a full audit. Every document, every violation letter, every complaint, every financial record. Neighbor after neighbor came forward saying they had been fined for nonsense, threatened for no reason, intimidated into silence. The HOA board, or what was left of it, tried to defend itself, but once the county got involved, their authority crumbled like dry sand. By sunset, Both Karen and her husband had been transported for processing, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt lighter. Like we were all waking from a nightmare we didn't realize we were stuck in. My son sat beside me on the porch, elbows resting on his knees. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I am," he smiled. "You know, Dad would have loved seeing this," I laughed softly. "He would have made popcorn." "Absolutely." We sat in silence for a moment, watching the golden evening settle over the street. Then my son stood. "All right, Mom, let's finish packing. You're moving out tonight." I looked at the boxes stacked near the doorway. I almost forgot I was moving. He lifted a box with one arm like it weighed nothing. "Not anymore. You're leaving all this behind. And trust me, by the time the county is done with them, this HOA is going to look very different." As we packed the last box into the truck, neighbors came forward offering help, real help. Not the fake smiles Karen's board used to demand. Someone brought water. Someone offered snacks. Someone even brought an entire homemade lasagna, just in case you didn't have time to cook tonight. And from the cruiser still parked in front of my yard, Karen screamed, "I'm calling my lawyer!" Nobody listened. Nobody cared, because the neighborhood had finally woken up. And as I stepped into the moving truck and looked one last time at the house I had fought so hard for, I realized something. I wasn't leaving in defeat. I was leaving in victory. The HOA didn't chase me out. They didn't break me. They didn't win. I won because I walked away free, and they were the ones who ended up trapped in the rules they created. As my son climbed into the driver's seat and the truck rumbled to life, he smiled at me and said, "Mom, this story's going to make one hell of a dinner conversation someday." I smiled back. "Oh," I said softly, "you have no idea." And with that, we drove away, leaving the HOA and its fallen tyrants behind forever.